Sarah Martinez had always been the kind of person who found humor in the darkest moments. Even as a child, when her father would come home drunk and angry, she would make silly faces at her younger brother Miguel to keep him from crying. Now at 28, that same instinct served her well as a search and rescue pilot in the remote mountains of Colorado. The morning started like any other. Sarah performed her pre-flight checks on the bright orange helicopter while her partner, Captain Jake Morrison, reviewed the mission briefings. 3 hikers had gone missing in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains during an unexpected early winter storm. The weather had cleared enough for a brief search window, but another front was moving. In fast. "We've got maybe 4 hours before this gets ugly again," Jake said, pointing to the satellite images on his tablet. Dark clouds were already gathering over the peaks, and the wind was picking up. Sarah nodded, running her hands along the helicopter's controls one final time. She had been flying these mountains for 6 years, ever since she left the Army. Every ridge, every valley, every dangerous downdraft was mapped in her memory. But the mountains were unforgiving, especially in winter, and she never took them lightly. The missing hikers were a family from Denver, Mark and Linda Chen, both in their 50s, and their 19-year-old daughter Emma. They had been experienced hikers, but the storm had caught them off guard while they were attempting to reach a remote hot spring. Their last known position was near Willow Lake, almost 8,000 feet up in terrain that became nearly impossible to navigate once snow began to fall. As Sarah lifted off, she felt the familiar rush that came with every rescue mission. Below them, the world transformed into a pristine white wilderness. Snow-covered peaks stretched endlessly in every direction, beautiful and deadly. The helicopter's rotors cut through the thin mountain air, and Sarah could feel the machine working harder at this altitude. They had been searching for almost 2 hours when Jake spotted something unusual through his binoculars, a flash of bright blue fabric against the white snow, partially hidden beneath a cluster of pine trees. Sarah maneuvered the helicopter closer, fighting against wind gusts that threatened to push them into the mountainside. "There," Jake said, his voice tense through the headset. "I can see 2 people, they're moving." Sarah's heart jumped with relief. Finding survivors was always the best part of her job. She began looking for a safe place to land, but the terrain was steep and rocky. The nearest flat ground was almost a quarter-mile away, which would mean a difficult hike through deep snow to reach the survivors. As she circled lower, preparing to set down, something felt wrong. The 2 figures below weren't waving or trying to signal them. Instead, they seemed to be running, stumbling through the snow as if they were trying to get away from something. Sarah squinted through the windscreen, trying to understand what she was seeing. "Jake, something's not right down there." Before Jake could respond, Sarah heard a sound that made her blood run cold. The sharp crack of gunfire echoed through the mountains, and she saw muzzle flashes from a ridge about 200 yards from where the 2 figures were running. Someone was shooting at them. "What the hell?" Jake grabbed his radio, trying to contact their base station, but all he got was static. The mountains often blocked radio signals, but the timing felt ominous. Sarah's mind raced as she tried to process what was happening. These weren't the missing hikers they were looking for. This was something else entirely. The 2 people running through the snow were being hunted by armed men positioned on the ridge above them. More gunfire erupted, and Sarah watched in horror as one of the running figures stumbled and fell. The other person, who appeared to be a woman, stopped and tried to help, but more shots forced her to keep moving. She was alone now, still running, but the deep snow was slowing her down. "We have to help her," Sarah said, her voice firm despite the fear growing in her chest. "Sarah, we don't know what we're getting into. This could be drug runners or worse. We need to contact base and get backup." But Sarah could see the woman below was losing ground. The shooters were moving down from their position on the ridge, and it was only a matter of time before they caught up with her. The woman kept looking up at the helicopter, and Sarah could see the desperation in her movements even from this distance. "Radio's still dead," Jake reported. "The storm front must be interfering with everything." Sarah made a decision that would change everything. Instead of flying away to get help, she began descending toward the valley floor. She couldn't land close to the woman without exposing them all to gunfire, but she could get near enough to provide some kind of assistance. "What are you doing?" Jake asked, though he was already checking his own equipment. "I'm not leaving her to die," Sarah replied. She had seen enough death in Afghanistan to last a lifetime. She wasn't about to watch another innocent person get gunned down while she flew away safely. The helicopter touched down in a small clearing about 300 yards from where the woman was still running. Sarah could see at least 4 armed figures pursuing her now, and they were closing the distance fast. The woman had noticed the helicopter landing and was changing direction, heading toward them. Jake grabbed the emergency medical kit and the flare gun they kept for emergencies. "If we're doing this, we better do it right." Sarah left the helicopter running and grabbed her own emergency supplies. She had a small pistol that she carried for protection against wildlife, but it would be no match against what appeared to be military-grade weapons in the hands of their attackers. The woman reached them first, collapsing in the snow just yards from the helicopter. She was young, maybe in her 20s, with long dark hair and eyes wide with terror. Blood stained the snow beneath her. She had been hit in the shoulder but was still conscious. "Please," she gasped. "They killed David. They killed him, and they're going to kill me too." Sarah helped her toward the helicopter while Jake kept watch for the approaching gunmen. "Who are they? What do they want?" "I saw something I wasn't supposed to see," the woman said through chattering teeth. "Something in those caves up there. They've been watching me for days, waiting for the right moment." As they reached the helicopter, Sarah heard Jake shout a warning. The armed men had reached the edge of the clearing and were taking positions behind trees and rocks. She could see at least 6 of them now, all carrying assault rifles and moving with military precision. The hunt was about to become a fight for survival, and Sarah's laugh was about to become the only sound of defiance left in the mountain sky. The first bullet shattered the helicopter's rear window, just as Sarah was helping the wounded woman into the passenger compartment. Jake dove behind the aircraft's landing gear, returning fire with his service pistol while Sarah tried to get everyone safely inside. "What's your name?" Sarah asked the woman as she applied pressure to the shoulder wound. "Elena," she gasped. "Elena Vasquez. I'm a geologist. I was doing research on mineral deposits when I found something I wasn't supposed to find." More gunfire erupted around them, and Sarah realized their position was becoming impossible to defend. The helicopter was too exposed, and their attackers had the advantage of cover and superior firepower. She made another split-second decision that would define the next phase of their ordeal. "We can't stay here," she shouted to Jake. "Get in. We're taking off." "Are you insane? They'll shoot us down." "Maybe. But if we stay here, we're definitely dead." Sarah fired up the helicopter's engines to full power while Jake scrambled into his seat. Elena was unconscious now from blood loss, but her breathing was steady. As the aircraft lifted off, bullets struck the fuselage and cracked the front windscreen, but the helicopter kept climbing. Sarah banked sharply to the left, using the mountainside to shield them from the gunmen below. She could feel the aircraft struggling with the thin air and the additional weight of their unexpected passenger, but they were gaining altitude. For a moment she thought they had escaped. That's when she saw the second helicopter. It was black, unmarked, and much newer than her rescue aircraft. It rose from behind a ridge about a mile away, moving with the kind of precision that suggested military training. Sarah's blood ran cold as she realized this wasn't a random encounter. These people had been expecting them. "Jake, we've got company," she said, pointing toward the approaching aircraft. Jake looked through the damaged windscreen and cursed. "That's a military bird, probably stolen or purchased on the black market. We're outgunned and outmaneuvered." The black helicopter was closing fast, and Sarah could see figures in the open doorway preparing what looked like a mounted machine gun. She pushed her aircraft to its limits, diving toward a narrow canyon that she knew would be difficult for the larger helicopter to navigate. Elena stirred in the back seat, her eyes opening just enough to focus on Sarah. "The caves," she whispered. "There are caves in Deadman's Canyon. That's where I found them. That's what they're trying to hide." Sarah knew Deadman's Canyon well. It was a treacherous maze of rock formations and narrow passages that had claimed the lives of several pilots over the years. The walls were so close together in some places that a helicopter's rotors could barely fit through. But if Elena was right, those caves might hold the answers to why they were being hunted. The black helicopter followed them into the canyon, but Sarah's knowledge of the terrain gave her a crucial advantage. She knew exactly where the passages were too narrow for the larger aircraft to follow. She also knew where the downdrafts were strongest and where the rock walls created dangerous wind patterns. As they flew deeper into the canyon, Sarah spotted something that made her heart race with both excitement and terror. There was indeed a cave opening about halfway up the canyon wall, but it wasn't empty. Vehicles were parked inside, hidden from aerial surveillance. She could see people moving around and what looked like equipment being loaded onto trucks. My God, Jake breathed, seeing what Sarah was seeing. What is this place? Elena struggled to sit up, looking out the window at the cave. Uranium, she said weakly. They're mining uranium without permits, without safety protocols. The radiation levels I measured were off the charts. They're poisoning the water supply for half the state. Everything suddenly made sense. Elena had stumbled across an illegal mining operation, probably run by a criminal organization with enough resources to field military-grade helicopters and trained gunmen. They couldn't afford to let her leave alive with evidence of what they were doing. The black helicopter had fallen back, unable to navigate the narrower sections of the canyon, but Sarah knew it was only temporary. They would find another way around, or call in additional aircraft. She needed to get Elena to safety and get word to the authorities about what they had discovered. But as they emerged from the far end of the canyon, Sarah's heart sank. 2 more. Helicopters were waiting for them, positioned to block any escape route. They were completely surrounded, outnumbered by at least 3 to 1 and running low on fuel. Well, Sarah said, a grim smile playing at the corners of her mouth, looks like we're going to have to get creative. Jake looked at her like she had lost her mind. Creative? Sarah, we're flying a rescue helicopter against military aircraft. What exactly did you have in mind? Sarah's smile widened and she let out a short laugh that seemed completely inappropriate given their circumstances. But Elena recognized something in that laugh, the sound of someone who had faced impossible odds before and somehow found a way to survive. I spent 2 tours in Afghanistan flying medical evacuations, Sarah said, her voice taking on a confidence that seemed to fill the helicopter's cabin. I've been shot at by experts, and I'm still here. These guys may have better equipment, but I know something they don't. What's that? Jake asked. I know these mountains like they know the backs of their hands. And more importantly, I know that storm front is about to hit us in less than an hour. They may have superior firepower, but I've got Mother Nature on my side. As if to emphasize her point, the first snowflakes began to hit the windscreen. The approaching storm was going to make flying conditions extremely dangerous, but it would also provide cover and confusion that Sarah could use to their advantage. Elena managed a weak smile. You're completely crazy, aren't you? Sarah's laugh echoed through the helicopter cabin, a sound of defiance that seemed to challenge the mountains themselves. Lady, if you wanted a boring rescue, you should have gotten lost somewhere easier to find. The black helicopters were closing in from 3 directions now, but Sarah was already formulating a plan that was either brilliant or completely suicidal. She looked at the approaching storm clouds, calculated wind patterns and visibility conditions, and made mental notes of every canyon, ridge, and hidden passage within a 50-mile radius. Hold on, she told her passengers. This is going to get interesting. As the first helicopter opened fire, Sarah dove toward a narrow ravine that she knew would be their only chance of escape. The sound of her laughter mixed with the roar of the engines and the whistle of the wind, creating a symphony of courage that would be remembered by everyone who heard it. The hunt was far from over, but Sarah Martinez was no longer just trying to survive. She was fighting back, and her laughter was becoming a battle cry that echoed across the mountains. The storm hit with the fury that only high-altitude weather systems can deliver. Within minutes, the clear mountain air became a swirling wall of snow and ice that reduced visibility to mere yards. Sarah used the chaos to her advantage, weaving through canyons and along ridgelines that she could navigate by memory alone. The black helicopters had lost visual contact, but Sarah knew they weren't giving up. She could occasionally hear the distant sound of their rotors echoing off the canyon walls, searching for any sign of her aircraft, They had sophisticated equipment that would help them track her heat signature and radio emissions, but the storm was interfering with everything electronic. Elena was getting weaker, and her wound needed immediate medical attention. Jake had done what he could with their first aid supplies, but she was still losing blood. They needed to get her to a hospital, but every route out of the mountains was likely being watched by their pursuers. "There's an old mining camp about 15 miles north of here," Sarah told Jake over the noise of the storm. "It's been abandoned for decades, but there might be buildings we can use for shelter." "What about fuel?" Jake asked, checking their gauges. "We're running on fumes." Sarah had been thinking about that problem too. Their fuel situation was critical, and the storm was forcing her to work the engines harder than usual. They might have enough to reach the mining camp, but they definitely wouldn't have enough to make it back to their base. "One problem at a time," she said, banking sharply to avoid a mountainside that appeared suddenly through the snow. Elena stirred in the back seat, her eyes opening with effort. "My research partner," she whispered. "Professor Morrison at Colorado State. He has copies of all my data. If something happens to me, he needs to know what we found." Jake turned to look at her. "Morrison? That's my brother, David Morrison. He's a geology professor." Elena's eyes widened despite her weakness. "Your brother? He's the one who sent me to investigate the mineral reports in this area. We've been working together for months." The coincidence was almost unbelievable, but it explained why Elena had trusted them so quickly. If Jake's brother had sent her, then she knew she had allies in her fight to expose the illegal mining operation. "David will know what to do with the information," Jake said, "but first we need to get you somewhere safe." Through the swirling snow, Sarah spotted the dark outline of buildings ahead. The old mining camp was still there, just as she remembered from her aerial surveys of the region. Most of the structures were partially collapsed, but one large building appeared to have an intact roof. Landing in a blizzard was one of the most dangerous things a pilot could attempt, especially in mountainous terrain. The wind gusts were unpredictable and the ground was invisible until the last moment. Sarah had to trust her instruments and her instincts, feeling for the aircraft's response to air currents and listening to the changing pitch of the rotors as they descended. The helicopter touched down hard, bouncing twice before settling in what appeared to be the old mining camp's main yard. Snow immediately began accumulating on the windscreen, and Sarah could feel the aircraft being pushed around by the wind even while on the ground. "We need to get inside fast," she said, shutting down the engines. "This storm is going to get worse before it gets better." Jake helped Elena out of the helicopter while Sarah grabbed their emergency supplies and the flare gun. The largest building turned out to be an old equipment shed with thick stone walls that had withstood decades of mountain weather. Inside, they found rusted mining equipment and piles of rotting timber, but it was shelter from the storm. Sarah used her flashlight to explore the building while Jake made Elena as comfortable as possible on a makeshift bed of emergency blankets. The structure was solid, with only a few places where snow was blowing through cracks in the walls. More importantly, it would hide their body heat from any thermal imaging equipment their pursuers might be using. "How did you find that uranium?" "Mine?" Sarah asked Elena while she worked on improving the bandage on her shoulder wound. Elena's voice was weak but determined. "I was collecting water samples from the high mountain lakes as part of a study on climate change effects on mineral content. The readings were completely wrong, radiation levels that should have been impossible at that elevation. I started investigating upstream, following the water sources, and that led me to the caves." "What did you see in there?" "A full-scale mining operation. Dozens of workers, most of them looking like they didn't want to be there. Heavy machinery that must have cost millions of dollars to transport to such a remote location. And the radiation shielding was minimal or non-existent. They're probably poisoning everyone who works there." Jake was checking the radio equipment, trying to get a signal through the storm. "Still nothing. We're completely cut off until this weather passes." Outside, the wind was howling through the abandoned mining camp with a sound that reminded Sarah of voices crying in the distance. The storm was getting stronger, which was both good and bad news. Good because it would keep their pursuers grounded. Bad because it would also prevent any rescue attempts. Elena suddenly gripped Sarah's arm with surprising strength. "Listen," she whispered. Through the sound of the storm, they could hear something else. The distant thump of helicopter rotors getting closer. Their pursuers hadn't given up, and they were apparently willing to risk flying in conditions that would challenge even the most experienced pilots. How is that possible? Jake asked, moving to a window to peer out through the snow. Military training, Sarah replied grimly, and probably night vision equipment that's better than anything we have. They're not going to stop until they find us. The sound of the rotors was getting closer, and now they could see lights moving through the storm. At least 2 helicopters were conducting a systematic search of the area, using powerful searchlights to penetrate the snow and darkness. Sarah made a decision that surprised even herself. Instead of hiding and hoping they wouldn't be found, she started laughing. It was a quiet laugh at first, but it grew stronger as an idea formed in her mind. "What's so funny?" Jake asked, staring at her like she had finally snapped under the pressure. "I just realized something," Sarah said, her eyes bright with an idea that was either brilliant or insane. "They're assuming we're trying to hide from them. They're searching every building, every possible shelter, being very systematic and thorough." And Sarah's laugh grew louder, echoing off the stone walls of the old mining shed. "And they're flying in formation, staying close together so they don't lose contact in the storm. All their attention is focused downward, looking for us on the ground." Elena understood first. "You want to steal one of their helicopters?" "Not steal," Sarah corrected. "Commandeer. While they're busy searching buildings for us, I'm going to sneak out there and disable one of their aircraft. Maybe 2 if I'm lucky." "Level the playing field a little," Jake shook his head. "That's suicide, Sarah. Even if you could get close enough, what then? You can't fly their helicopter. It's probably got security systems, encrypted communications, the works." "I don't need to fly it," Sarah replied, her laughter taking on an edge that was both dangerous and confident. "I just need to make sure they can't fly it either. And I know exactly how to do that." Outside, the searchlights were getting closer. They had maybe 10 minutes before the helicopters reached their building. Sarah checked her pistol, made sure she had extra ammunition, and started toward the door. "Sarah, wait," Elena called weakly. "If something happens to you, who's going? To get us out of here?" Sarah paused at the door, her hand on the handle. For a moment, her expression was serious, almost sad. Then her smile returned, along with that laugh that had become her signature sound of defiance. "If something happens to me," she said, "you'll figure it out. You're tougher than you think, both of you. But nothing's going to happen to me because I've got something they don't have." "What's that?" Jake asked. "I've got nothing left to lose, and that makes me very dangerous." With that, Sarah opened the door and stepped out into the storm, her laughter swallowed by the wind, but her determination burning brighter than ever. The storm provided perfect cover for Sarah's approach. Snow fell so heavily that visibility was reduced to just a few feet, and the wind howled loud enough to mask any sounds she might make. She moved carefully through the abandoned mining camp, using the old buildings as cover while she studied the search patterns of the 2 helicopters. The aircraft were working methodically, hovering over each structure long enough to illuminate it completely with their searchlights before moving on to the next building. The pilots were good, maintaining formation even in the dangerous conditions, but their systematic approach was also predictable. Sarah counted at least 8 armed men between the 2 helicopters. They were using rappelling equipment to drop searchers onto the roofs of larger buildings, then pulling them back up before moving to the next location. It was professional, efficient, and exactly what she had expected from a military-trained team. What they weren't expecting was for their target to be moving toward them instead of hiding. The first helicopter set down near the camp's old administrative building, about 100 yards from where Sarah was crouched behind a collapsed mining shed. 4 men got out, leaving only the pilot and co-pilot aboard. The second helicopter maintained overwatch, circling slowly with its searchlight sweeping the area. Sarah waited until the ground team had entered the building, then began her approach. The snow was deep enough to muffle her footsteps, and the wind was strong enough to shake the helicopter slightly, which would help hide any vibrations from her movements. She reached the aircraft just as the ground team emerged from the administrative building, They were talking into their radios, probably, reporting that the building was empty. Sarah could hear them discussing which structure to search next. Working quickly, she opened the helicopter's engine compartment and began her sabotage. She didn't need to cause dramatic damage, just enough to ensure the aircraft wouldn't fly when they needed it most. She disconnected several key electrical connections and loosened a crucial fuel line. The helicopter would start, but it wouldn't stay airborne for more than a few minutes. The ground team was moving toward another building when Sarah heard something that made her freeze. One of the men was speaking in accented English, giving orders with the authority of someone in command. "The woman is injured and needs medical attention," he was saying. "They cannot have gone far in this storm. Search every structure twice if necessary, but find them." Sarah recognized the voice. It was Colonel Viktor Petrov, a former Russian Special Forces officer who had been linked to several illegal mining operations across South America. She had read about him in intelligence briefings during her military service. If Petrov was involved, this operation was much bigger and more dangerous than she had realized. The second helicopter was moving closer, its searchlights sweeping back and forth across the area where Sarah was working. She needed to finish her sabotage and get back to cover before they spotted her. As she closed the engine compartment, one of the ground team members started walking back toward the helicopter. Sarah had nowhere to run. The nearest cover was too far away, and the snow would show her footprints clearly. Instead of running, she did something that surprised even herself. She walked openly toward the man, her hands visible but ready to draw her weapon if necessary. "Excuse me," she called out in a friendly voice, as if she was just another member of their team. "Colonel Petrov wants to see you at the main building." The man paused, obviously confused. In the storm and darkness, with Sarah wearing her own military-style flight suit, the deception might have worked if she had kept walking. But she made the mistake of stopping to see if he believed her. "Who are you?" he asked in heavily accented English, reaching for his weapon. Sarah's response was swift and decisive. She drew her pistol and fired twice, both shots hitting center mass. The man dropped without another sound, his body disappearing into the snow. The gunshots echoed across the mining camp despite the storm, and immediately she heard shouting from the other team members. The searchlight from the circling helicopter swung toward her position, and she heard the whine of the aircraft's engines as the pilot prepared for evasive maneuvers. Sarah ran toward the building where Jake and Elena were hiding, but she knew she wouldn't make it before the helicopter's gunners could get her in their sights. The searchlight found her when she was still 50 yards from cover, and she heard the distinctive sound of a heavy machine gun being charged for firing. That's when her sabotage paid off. The first helicopter tried to lift off to join the search, but Sarah's tampering with the fuel line caused the engine to sputter and die, just as it left the ground. The aircraft dropped hard, landing sideways in the snow with a grinding crash that sent pieces of rotor blade flying through the air. The remaining helicopter immediately changed course, moving to assist its downed partner. This gave Sarah the few seconds she needed to reach the stone building where her friends were waiting. "Time to go," she announced, bursting through the door with snow covering her from head to toe. "What happened out there?" Jake asked, helping Elena to her feet. "I evened the odds a little, but we've still got problems. These aren't just random criminals. This is a professional military unit led by a very dangerous man. And now they know exactly where we are." Elena was barely conscious, but she managed to focus on Sarah's face. "Did you find out who's behind the mining operation?" "Viktor Petrov, former Russian Special Forces, now working for whoever pays him the most. This is bigger than illegal uranium mining. This is international organized crime." Jake was gathering their supplies while keeping watch through a crack in the wall. "The helicopter that crashed is burning now. That's going to attract attention for miles around." "Good," Sarah said, checking her weapon and ammunition. "Maybe someone will see the smoke and send help. Or maybe it will just bring more of Petrov's people," Jake replied. Outside, they could hear the remaining helicopter landing near the crashed aircraft. Men were shouting orders in multiple languages, and Sarah could see lights moving around. The wreckage through the snow. Elena grabbed Sarah's arm with surprising strength. "My research data," she whispered. "I hid backup copies in a cache about 2 miles from here." If we don't make it out, someone needs to know where to find that information. We're going to make it out, Sarah said firmly. All of us. But even as she said it, Sarah could see the lights of additional helicopters approaching through the storm. Petrov had called for backup, and their situation was about to become much more desperate. Elena struggled to sit up straighter, her eyes meeting, Sarah's with determination that matched her own. There's something else you need to know. The uranium they're mining, it's weapons grade. This isn't just about poisoning water supplies. They're producing material that could be used to make nuclear weapons. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. This wasn't just a rescue mission anymore, or even a fight for survival. They were potentially the only people who could prevent nuclear material from falling into the hands of international criminals. Sarah's laugh returned, but this time it was different. It wasn't just defiance or courage. It was the sound of someone who had found a purpose worth dying for. "Well," she said, her voice carrying a confidence that seemed to light up the dark building. "Looks like we just became the most important people in Colorado." Outside, the sound of approaching helicopters grew louder, but Sarah was already planning their next move. The storm was starting to clear, which would make hiding more difficult, but would also allow for better visibility during their escape. "Jake, how much ammunition do we have left?" "Not enough for a prolonged firefight." "Elena, how far did you say that data cache was?" 2 miles northeast, near the old weather station." Sarah nodded, her mind working through the tactical situation with the clarity that had kept her alive through countless dangerous missions. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and trapped in a blizzard, but they had something their enemies didn't expect. They had the truth, and Sarah Martinez was determined to make sure the world heard it, no matter what the cost. The sound of boots crunching through snow outside their building told Sarah that Petrov's men had found their hiding place. She could hear at least 6 different voices calling out positions as they surrounded the old mining shed. The professional coordination confirmed her worst fears. These weren't just hired thugs, but trained soldiers. "We know you're in there." Petrov's voice called through the storm. His English was nearly perfect, with just a trace of accent. "Ms. Vasquez, you have information that belongs to my employers. Return it, and we can discuss terms for your safe departure." Sarah positioned herself near a window where she could see the approaching figures. "What do you think, Elena? Feel like negotiating with international criminals?" Elena managed a weak smile despite her pain. "I'd rather die than let them get away with this." "That can be arranged," Jake muttered, checking his weapon. Outside, Petrov continued his attempt at negotiation. "Pilot, your helicopter is damaged and you have limited ammunition. The storm is clearing, which means reinforcements will arrive soon. You cannot win this fight." Sarah's response surprised everyone, including herself. She started laughing. Not the quiet chuckle of amusement, but a full, rich laugh that echoed off the stone walls and carried through the thin mountain air to where Petrov's men were taking positions. "You know what's funny, Colonel?" she called back. "You're absolutely right. We can't win this fight. The odds are impossible. We're trapped, and you have every advantage." There was silence from outside for a moment, as if her response had confused. "Them? Then you will surrender?" Petrov asked. Sarah's laughter grew louder. "Hell no. I'm laughing because you made one crucial mistake." "Which is?" "You assumed we were trying to win." Before anyone could ask what she meant, Sarah grabbed the flare, gun, and fired a bright red emergency flare directly up through a hole in the roof. The flare exploded high above the mining camp, creating a brilliant red star that could be seen for miles despite the storm. "What are you doing?" Jake asked. "Creating a beacon," Sarah replied, loading another flare. "Elena said there's a weather station 2 miles from here. Weather stations have emergency communication equipment that's designed to work in any conditions." She fired the second flare, this one angled toward the northeast where Elena had indicated the weather station was located. The bright light illuminated the mountainside briefly before disappearing into the storm. "You're trying to signal for help," Elena realized. "Not just help," Sarah said, loading a third flare. "I'm trying to signal someone specific. My old unit. Commander from Afghanistan lives about 30 miles from here. He'll recognize the pattern I'm using. 3 reds, pause, 2 whites. It's a code we used for mission-critical, immediate extraction required. She fired the 3rd red flare, then quickly loaded and fired 2 white ones in succession. The light show was visible even through the increasingly heavy snow, and she hoped that Major Tom Wilson was somewhere he could see it. Outside, Petrov was obviously losing patience. Enough games. Take the building. The attack came from 3 directions simultaneously. Armed figures appeared at the windows while others kicked down the door. Sarah, Jake, and Elena found themselves in a desperate firefight with trained professionals who had every advantage except one. Sarah knew the building better than they did. During her earlier exploration, she had noticed that the old mining shed was connected to other structures by underground tunnels that had been used to transport equipment and materials. The entrance to the tunnel system was hidden behind a pile of rotting,